Hello, my name is Douglas Rumbaugh, and in this video I would like to discuss some considerations for purchasing a laptop for college. Now, I teach at a small university, and at the beginning of every year I get a number of questions from incoming students or the parents of incoming students with respect to what should they be looking for in a laptop. So my institution in particular requires everybody have a laptop. I know some schools don't, but mine does, and it's probably a good idea to have a computer of some kind and not be entirely dependent upon university provided labs. But that can be a whole nother discussion. So you're looking at purchasing a laptop for college. What should you worry about? What things matter, what things don't? What's some general advice for purchasing? To begin with, I'm going to say I will not make specific recommendations of particular computers because obviously that's going to change from year to year with availability. I also don't know exactly what it is that you're studying and what your specific requirements are. And I also don't know a whole hell of a lot about consumer laptops. It's not a space that I operate in very much. But I can tell you about hardware, and I can tell you about general guidelines you should use when selecting a computer that are applicable regardless of the computer itself. So that's what we're going to be doing. There are probably two major important things you should bear in mind, and then a bunch of less important things. So the two biggest things that matter in a laptop that you're looking at for college are going to be it needs to have a solid state drive and it needs to be reliable. So those are the two important pieces. Everything else is subsidiary to those two. So solid state drive's easy. I'll hit that one first. The single biggest performance uplift you'll see in a computer in terms of just general use and the responsiveness of the applications and things like that is going to be a solid state drive. If you have the choice between a 1 terabyte hard drive and a 256 or 128 gig SSD, go for the SSD. The trade-off in space is just not worth it in terms of usability of the computer. A solid-state drive, particularly a good one, but most laptops have reasonable solid states. Having a solid-state drive is really important to having a performant computer. Just trust me. Get a solid-state drive. If it has a laptop, if it has a hard drive, don't touch it. Now, reliability. This one is a little bit trickier because it's hard to get a good read on the reliability of a particular computer. It's not something people seem to care about very much. If you read reviews and whatnot, most reviews of devices, if not being done after owning the device for a couple days or weeks, maybe you'll see someone who holds on to something for 3 or 4 months before they review it. But you're very rarely going to see someone review a device 4 years after they bought it. But when you're looking at a laptop for college, especially if you're on a budget and you don't have a lot of money, you would like to have a computer that you can buy now and still have and be usable in 4 years' time. So that suddenly becomes really important. Now, in addition to just wanting it to last for a while, reliability is also important because this isn't going to be a gaming device. You'll probably game on it if you're into that, but that's not its focus. This is basically going to be the thing you need to do your job for the next 4 years. You can think of school as a job. Now it's a job you pay for instead of that pays you, but the point remains. So this isn't just a toy, right? This is a necessary component for you being able to get your work done. And that changes the calculus dramatically because even if your gaming computer breaks down, that's inconvenient. But if the laptop you're using to do all your schoolwork breaks down, that can be catastrophic. Most places, most faculty and institutions aren't going to accept my laptop broke as a reasonable excuse for missing out on a big project because that just represents poor planning on your part. So when you're looking at getting a laptop, you want to get something that is reliable. That's hard to know about though. So just some general advice on reliability that is fairly broadly applicable is going to be that if you want a truly reliable machine, steer away from consumer electronics and look at enterprise stuff. So look at the professional laptops that, say, HP, Dell, and Lenovo sell. Those are designed for a very different target market than your fancy RGB gaming laptops that break in 5 minutes. You'll want one of those, I think. That seems to be the best way to go if you want something that's actually reliable and will last you for quite a while. Now, as you're looking at those, you'll notice that they are substantially more expensive for the same thing in a lot of cases, partially because they are overbuilt and more reliable, and also because enterprises have more money to throw at things like laptops. But you can shortcut it by buying something that's used rather than new. So there's a very large market for refurbished computers from companies. So you have a big corporation that has a massive fleet of laptops, and they decide they're going to start upgrading to the newer version. So they offload all those old laptops onto refurbishers who fix them up and sell them on Amazon. It's a great way to get a pretty good computer for not very much money if you're willing to accept the fact that it has some scuffs on it. As an example here, I actually have two refurbs beside me. The first one is an old ThinkPad. It's a T430 ThinkPad. This thing checks all the boxes. It's a ThinkPad, which these things have legendary reliability status. How much of that is just lore and how much of it is true, I have no idea. I haven't had any problems with this thing, though. And it's a relatively old machine. It's got plenty of good I/O if that's what matters to you. It has, this guy in particular, I believe, has 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is probably about the minimum you should be looking for. And it cost, how much did this thing cost? It was under $300. It was like $280, I think, for this thing. Now, not a laptop, but you can get desktops as well. Obviously, you probably want a laptop, but it's not a bad idea to get one of each. And I'll talk about that towards the end. But this is a Dell Optiflex Mini. The specs aren't phenomenal. It's relatively old. I actually got it as a bench computer because it's a workbench computer because it's small and it's old enough to actually have a serial port on it. So I can use it fairly easily for hooking up to electronic devices and things like that. But I paid about $180 for this, and it came with a mouse and a keyboard and a wireless dongle, all of which are crap, and an SSD in it, which admittedly is also crap, but we'll take a look at how that performs later. So refurbished enterprise hardware is a good way to go if you're on a budget and you want a computer that's going to be somewhat reliable. Definitely bear that stuff in mind. Now, some other things that are probably worth looking for in a computer that you're going to be using for a couple of years as a student would be repairability. Is your computer serviceable? Can you swap out parts if they break? Because usually when a computer breaks, it's not that the whole thing just suddenly went up in flames, right? Usually a distinct part of it is broken. And quite often the parts of it that are broken can be fixed or at least replaced. So common things to go would be storage devices like hard drives or SSDs. SSDs are generally more reliable than hard drives, but I've had SSDs die on me too. So can you replace the SSD, or is the SSD soldered onto the board? Can you replace the memory, or is the memory soldered onto the board? Can you get replacement coolers if the fan goes? Fans will often go as well, and that can result in more problems. It's a good idea to keep an eye on your fan and fix your fan if you need to, because a broken fan will quickly lead to broken other things. What would be some other stuff? Display assemblies, that's probably getting up there in terms of difficulty for repairs. Batteries is a big one. One thing you definitely should care about is if you can easily replace the battery. So as an example, on this ThinkPad, the battery is really easy to replace because it's just right here. So all you do is you pull on this latch and sit down. Yeah, you pull on this latch and battery module pops out. You can stick a new one on. These things wear out over time, and if you're looking at a computer that's going to last you for 4 years, you'll, especially in a school setting where you're off the cord quite often, you will probably want something you can replace the battery on. Otherwise, you may end up throwing out the laptop when it's still perfectly good because you can't fix the battery. So replaceable batteries are a pretty good idea. That's one of the reasons I like these ThinkPads, although they by no means have a monopoly on that. Things you probably should stay away from would be anything that doesn't meet those criteria, basically. So devices that I would steer clear of would be things like, so this is a Microsoft Surface Pro. They're really nice, and I would, although they're technically different devices, I would lump iPads into this as well and things like that. But they don't age well, especially these Surface tablets don't age particularly well. They're a little bit fragile. They're impossible to fix. This thing is passively cooled. It doesn't even have a fan in it, which is going to reduce its lifespan as well. So they're very cool very cool and useful tools, but I would not rely on it as your sole computer. And same deal for something like an iPad, which would be even worse because an iPad can't run a lot of full desktop software. They're useful to have and they're nice for taking notes and stuff, but if you're looking at getting a computer, don't get a tablet. I would also steer away from. I don't actually have a Chromebook around here, but I do have a Pinebook, which will be my stand-in for a Chromebook, I guess. You don't want a Chromebook. You may think you want one, but you don't. They're very limiting in what they can do. Even a lot of them are ARM-based, so which this Pinebook is as well. So even if you install a full operating system on it, you're still going to be limited in software availability for the most part. You probably want to steer clear of them. They're pretty shoddily made. Especially when for a similar price to a decent Chromebook, you can get refurbished ThinkPad, which is way better in every way except for the fact that it's not pretty. Now, another thing you want to bear in mind is it's going to be a pretty good idea for you to have a backup computer. You don't have to have one lined up right away, obviously, but if the opportunity arises, you should look to get a backup computer. Now, the reason for this is because your computer is going to break, or it might break. And if you have a backup, then when your computer breaks, you can just switch over to the other one and carry on like normal. So I highly recommend you have a backup computer, if not that you own one that you can easily line up access to just in case your current computer should go. On that note, I think a desktop is a really good option for a backup computer if you have the space to put it. So if you've got space if you have a desk in your dorm room or apartment or something like that you can set an actual desktop computer up in, I think that would be a really good option for a backup computer. Now the reason for that is because many of the things that make laptops inherently unreliable aren't problems on desktop computers. A desktop computer is really easy to service. Most of the parts can be very easily changed out, including the big ones like fans. You can get replacement fans for very cheap and throw them in if your fans start to go. Any of the moving parts, because they're not being carried around, they're not being banged around in a bag. They don't have to worry about that. If you spill coffee on your keyboard, it's away from the computer, and so the computer's probably fine. You just have to replace the keyboard if the keyboard happens to not like that very much. They don't have hinge mechanisms that break. So a desktop would be a really good way to go for a backup computer if you've got the space for it. And you can also, with a desktop, you can get substantially more performance for substantially less money. Desktops are much more powerful for much cheaper than laptops. So you can get a pretty beefy desktop for not a whole hell of a lot in comparison to how much it would cost to get a similarly spec'd laptop. If you're studying, say, computer science, that can be quite useful. And they make a great backup computer because, if your laptop dies and you have to finish your paper, well, you can just go to your place and use the desktop computer, right? It might be a little bit inconvenient, but it's better than nothing. It's better than being completely screwed over. And because you're not carrying your desktop out around with you, you're not likely to drop it and break it or lose it or anything like that. So I would highly recommend going for a desktop computer for your backup. And again, you can buy cheap refurbished ones like that. Although I would probably get something a little bit beefier than this. This would definitely be fine as well. Oh, I guess one other thing is you could probably get by with something like a Pinebook as a backup. So if you're unfamiliar with Pinebooks, these things are great. It's a really solid $200 laptop. It's a bit difficult to line up getting one sometimes because of the way they're manufactured. They're made in big batches, and then when the batch sells, they order another batch, which means that at any given moment you might not be able to obtain one without waiting for quite some time. But if you happen to be able to get one or plan to get one, these can be a decent backup laptop too, and they're $200. It's a laptop, so it's quite nice in that respect. It's not as powerful. It runs basically a phone processor. So it's not as powerful and it won't run all the applications, but you could definitely get a word processor and most programming languages running in this thing. So if you need to write a paper or something, this could be a good backup as well. Wouldn't daily drive it, you might be able to daily drive it depending on what you're doing. In general, you probably won't be able to, but it is a perfectly good backup, and it's relatively cheap. So this would be a pretty good option too. So those are just some random ramblings on computer selection for coming into college. I hope that you found this interesting, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What do you think is important or not important in a computer for college, or by extension work? College and work are very similar. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Hope that you found this interesting, and I will see you in the next one.